The top 10 of survival stories against all odds. The human spirit has demonstrated an amazing ability for resiliency, willpower, and inventiveness in the face of potentially fatal hardship. Numerous people have overcome adversity, pushed above their physical and mental limits, and triumphed over seemingly impossible circumstances because of their will to survive. You will discover here some of these survivors' incredible stories who serve as a reminder that, when we go deep and don't give up, miracles can happen and hope can be discovered even in the worst circumstances. Number 10. The incredible journey of Poon Lim. Chinese sailor Poon Lim currently holds the record for the longest period of time spent at sea alone, having survived 133 days in the Atlantic during World War II. Poon was able to flee into a life raft with meager provisions when a German U-boat attacked his ship. He created a water still to distill seawater, a knife from a biscuit tin, and an improvised fishing line with amazing inventiveness. Poon endured harsh weather and almost ran into enemy submarines while surviving on fish, birds, and even sharks. He was eventually saved by Brazilian fishermen, and everyone facing seemingly impossible circumstances might find encouragement in his amazing story. Number 9. The Donner Party's harrowing ordeal. The story of the American pioneers known as the Donner Party, who departed for California in 1846, is among the most terrifying and well-known accounts of survival against all odds. The gang was stranded in the Sierra Nevada mountains owing to heavy snowfall, which resulted in a severe food shortage and a desperate attempt at survival that involved cannibalism. Out of the 87 members of the party, only 48 survived the difficult 5 months in the frigid wilderness until help arrived. A sobering reminder of the limits of human endurance and survival instinct is provided by the story of the Donner Party. Number 8. Julianne Coep's miraculous fall. After her flight was struck by lightning in 1971, 17-year-old Julianne Coep was the only survivor of a plane accident in the Peruvian Amazon. In midair, it broke apart, leaving Coep securely fastened to her seat. Julianne fell from a height of more than 10,000 feet, 3,048 meters, yet she was able to survive because the thick forest canopy cushioned her fall. Julianne survived on a bag of sweets and her knowledge of the rainforest for 11 days while trekking through the harsh jungle without food, suffering from a fractured collarbone, a gash on her arm, and a swollen right eye. After 9 days, she managed to locate an encampment despite the fact that the insects in the bush had not yet eaten her alive and had infected her arm with maggots. She administered basic self-care, such as dousing the infestation of maggots with gasoline. She was discovered a few hours later by laborers, who treated her with first aid and transported her to a more populous region before airlifting her to a hospital. She ultimately came upon a crew of loggers who assisted her in getting to safety. As a result, her incredible tale has come to symbolize the tenacity and resiliency of the human spirit. Her story was eventually told in the 2000 documentary Wings of Hope by director Werner Herzog, who had a seat booked on that very flight before canceling at the last minute. Number 7. Aron Ralston's self-amputation. When Aron Ralston had to amputate his own arm in 2003 in order to survive, his terrifying experience made headlines around the globe. Ralston was hiking when a boulder fell and stuck his right arm against the canyon wall in Blue John's isolated canyon in Utah. His supplies of food and water were limited, and no one was aware that he was there. His own self-rescue was required. Before deciding to self-amputate in order to free himself, he struggled for 3 days. Still, he almost gave up after 2 days of experimenting with several approaches. He was out of water at this time and subsisting on his own urine. That is, until day 6, when it occurred to him that if he could just break his ulna and radius, he could much more simply amputate a section of his own arm. He successfully amputated his hand after an hour of effort with an inexpensive multi-tool, but he still needed to descend a 65-foot wall with one hand in order to return to his truck. Ralston rappelled down a 65-foot precipice when he had freed himself and walked several miles. After 6 hours of self-amputation, he was found by a European family while camping, and he was taken into custody. He was on the verge of passing out from blood loss when he was discovered. Even now, he is still alive and well, enjoying outdoor adventures and climbing trips when he isn't making speeches or having his life story turned into a movie. His inspirational tale of survival and tenacity has touched millions of people, serving as the inspiration for the movie 127 Hours. Number 6. The Andes Flight Disaster Survivors. 45 people were on board when Uruguayan Air Force Flight 571, including a rugby team from Uruguay, crashed into the Andes Mountains in 1972. With no food and no way to communicate, The crew was stuck in the icy tundra and had to endure an unbelievable ordeal. It took 72 days and multiple fruitless attempts to get assistance before the 16 surviving survivors were eventually saved. They had turned to eating their dead friends' flesh in order to survive. This choice caused some debate but ultimately guaranteed their survival. The nonfiction book, Alive, which tells the story of the Andres survivors, was inspired by their narrative, and other film adaptations were eventually made. Number 5. Ada Blackjack's Arctic Triumph. In the early 1920s, Ada Blackjack, an Inupiat woman, was the only survivor of a failed Arctic trip. She became part of a group of 4 guys who wanted to take Wrangel Island back for Canada. Ada worked for the group as a seamstress and cook, although she had never been in the wilderness. Inadequate supplies, bad weather, and the disappearance of their relief party were all problems for the team. The men eventually left Ada alone to go find assistance, but they never came back. Blackjack lived there, unaccompanied, for 2 years in the severe Arctic climate, a difficult feat given the possibility of a polar bear attack. Her survival was mostly dependent on the meat of seals, which she learned to hunt, until August 28, 1923, when she was eventually saved. It is claimed that Blackjack was not welcomed as a hero. Rather, the family eventually vindicated her after meeting with her and issuing a statement that Blackjack had done everything possible to save their son's life, but she was nonetheless chastised for failing to save the life of her male crewmate. Even yet, she lived in poverty for the remainder of her life until passing away in 1983. Number 4. José Salvador Alvarenga's Ocean Odyssey. Fisherman José Salvador Alvarenga set off on what was intended to be a quick fishing expedition off the coast of Mexico in November 2012. His small boat was blown off course by a strong storm, leaving him stranded in the huge Pacific Ocean. After his friend finally perished from malnourishment and thirst, Alvarenga managed to survive on his own for 438 days at sea, eating raw fish, turtles, and rainwater. He was eventually saved after his boat washed up on a secluded atoll in the Marshall Islands in January 2014. His inspirational story of survival went viral and demonstrated the extraordinary fortitude and resourcefulness of the human soul. Number 3. The Shackleton Expedition. The goal of Sir Ernest Shackleton's 1914 Imperial Transantarctic Expedition intended to use the South Pole to traverse the Antarctic continent. Their ship, the Endurance, was eventually crushed and sunk after becoming stuck in pack ice, resulting in disaster. The 28-man crew was left alone on the ice and set out on a daring quest for survival. While the rest of the crew endured hard conditions for more than 4 months, Shackleton and a small team navigated a lifeboat across 800 miles, 1,287 kilometers, of dangerous seas in search of assistance. All 28 crew members somehow made it out alive, and their inspiring tale of perseverance and fortitude has come to represent resilience and optimism. Number 2. Apollo 13's near disaster. The tragic Apollo 13 mission to the moon in 1970 has come to represent perseverance in the face of adversity. The spacecraft experienced a catastrophic explosion, trapping the 3 astronauts in a situation where their oxygen supply was running low and they had little supplies. The crew and engineers on Earth labored nonstop to get past several challenges and figure out a safe means to send the astronauts back home in a race against time. Their resourcefulness and cooperation enabled a successful return to Earth, and the famous line, "Houston, we have a problem," became a symbol of the strength of the human spirit. Number 1. Mauro Prosperi's Desert Nightmare. In 1994, Mauro Prosperi, an Italian police officer, went off course during the tough 6-day marathon des Sables across the Sahara Desert by a sandstorm. Prosperi got lost and confused, and he was without food or water for days while he wandered around in the extreme heat. In a desperate bid to survive, he started drinking his own urine and eating snakes and bats that he found in abandoned temples. After 9 days and 180 miles, 290 kilometers, Prosperi finally found a nomadic village that would save his life. His amazing story of overcoming extreme difficulties to survive is evidence of the human spirit's resiliency and willpower.